of welcoming all of you here. So welcome. My name is Kathy Barnett. I am running for Congress in this district, the 4th. Not only am I running, but we're winning. And I also get the distinct honor of introducing our host, our commentator, moderator for this event, Miss Sarah Huckabee Saunders.
We might need to spend a little more time here. Thank you so much for coming out on a little bit of a dreary day, but thankfully I brought some sunshine with me. One of my very most favorite people, somebody who I know you all love, and someone who has been working extremely hard over the last 4 years, but particularly over the last several weeks, making sure that we get Donald Trump re-elected for 4 more years. I'm going to jump right in because I don't want to keep you all waiting. Please welcome my good friend, Ivanka Trump.
For 5 days from now.
I don't think we've seen this much enthusiasm anywhere we've been, so I definitely think it's safe to say we're in Trump country, so. Like I said, we're so glad to be here and so thankful for everybody taking time and coming out. I know that there have been some difficult moments, certainly for the entire country over the last several months, but particularly here in your backyard over the last even just several days. We've seen a lot of unrest in the city of Philadelphia, and we actually just had the opportunity to meet with John and William from the Fraternal Order of Police that have been involved in helping.
Actually, John and William are here in the audience. Please stand. Thank you.
We are so thankful for the men and women of our law enforcement, and we know what a difficult job they have. I don't think there's anybody who's been a greater supporter of the law enforcement than President Trump. And Ivanka, I know you've seen that firsthand and watched as your dad has made sure to talk about the need for law and order and backing our law enforcement, but also trying to find that balance of creating opportunity for all Americans so that everybody does better. And I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about the work that he's done, what you've seen, and what you think we'll see moving forward in the next 4 years under this president to bring our country together.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and I'd like to start by expressing my condolences, as the president has, to the Wallace family and to the families of the close to 50 men and women in blue who were hospitalized in recent days due to the riots taking place. I think there's been a false narrative that's been brewing as of late that you can't support law enforcement and empower and uplift minority and Black communities, and we just fundamentally disagree with it. You can do both. This president will always fight for the police and for increased funding. Actually, when Congress failed to act, it was this president who issued an executive order to standardize use of force, to give additional funds to officers in very challenging situations, complex situations having to do with mental health related issues, so that they could have co-responders. So the president very much wants to collaborate with law enforcement, have a seat at the table to see what can be done going forward. But at the same time, he wants to create opportunity and jobs and help long neglected communities thrive. One example would be Opportunity Zones, which has brought a flood of capital into underserved communities across the nation. Over 9,000 of them, as designated by the governor's measure. I think we all believe in the power of education and how important an investment this is in the future of our country and the next generation. It was this president who has been advancing school choice throughout the nation. And hopefully we will change Governor Wolf's mind on this subject very, very soon, because it is so important. Competition and choice. HBCUs, securing historical funding for our historically Black colleges and universities. Yeah. And then, of course, broader initiatives such as generational criminal justice reform, which the Democrats have talked about for a long time, but it was President Trump who delivered. So we have to do both. We have to support law enforcement and work with law enforcement, and we've found law enforcement incredibly receptive. They need the resources to be able to handle these problems while creating growth and opportunity in underserved communities, and that's exactly what this president has been doing.
As I mentioned, a couple of the things that the country has been dealing with, obviously what we just talked about, but certainly I think one of the most unprecedented challenges that the president has faced, and frankly that the country has faced in decades, is the COVID pandemic and how he has dealt with that, how he has led our country through that. I'd love for you to talk about some of the success story of what he's done, but also what you see moving forward. I think everyone knows that we are going to need a strong leader to bring our economy back to where it was pre-COVID and be even stronger. And he's proven he can do that. Talk about a little bit what we can expect to see coming out of this pandemic under this president.
Well, I was there and I was in the room for many of these early conversations, and the president took strong and decisive action to prevent tremendous further loss of life. The doctors and scientists were all telling us that there was the potential to lose close to 2 million Americans as this plague descended upon our shores. Now, as he's the first to say, 1 American is one too many, but what he was able to accomplish is truly extraordinary, and you have to break it down into at least 2 categories. So first, on the health and the medical components of the virus, whether it's just extraordinary speed in developing a vaccine which will be delivered by the end of this year. The scientists tell us that he's been able to accomplish in 5 to 6 months what would have taken 5 to 6 years without compromising the process or the efficacy of the end result. So that's just like everything else, clearing the bureaucratic hurdles to success. Then the longest, the biggest mobilization of the private sector since World War II. It's extraordinary having them make PPE and ventilators and ensuring that our governors had what they needed when they needed it. And they had what they needed from the federal government when they needed it, whether it be hospital ships or ventilators, which there was tremendous fear because States didn't have stockpiles, and the federal government's stockpile had been depleted and never replenished by the previous administration. So therapeutics mortality rate has decreased by 85% since April. 85%. Vaccines, and just a general better knowledge of what it is that we're contending with. Because keep in mind, it was new, nobody really knew, so this had to be started from scratch. Then you go to the economic side, and he was able to get Congress to move in a bipartisan package to secure $4 trillion of relief for the American people. Because this was no fault of their own. Small businesses were being instructed to close their doors with an uncertain time frame and couldn't make payroll or overhead. So through the PPP program, 1.8 million jobs in this state, Pennsylvania alone, were saved by supporting small businesses, which represent 47% of the workforce. And then the direct payments to those who have been adversely affected. So the combination of both of these things was a Herculean lift. And I will say, as the vaccine comes online, as the therapeutics only continue to get better, and as we begin, hopefully, as a country and a world to turn the corner and put this dark chapter behind us, do not take for granted that the economy will continue the upward trajectory that we've seen. President Trump has committed to creating 10 million new jobs in the next 10 months. And it will require somebody like him to actually execute on that, because everything that he has done has been said by the other side that they would turn. They would completely retract or actually go in the opposite direction. So while we want further tax cuts, Biden wants to raise taxes on working families by $4 trillion. We know what they do in terms of heavy-handed regulation, which we've been pulling back the layers of bureaucracy so small business and people can thrive. Energy independence, so important here in Pennsylvania. The oil and natural gas industry supports 370 million Pennsylvania jobs. 370,000 Pennsylvania jobs. That's a big number. 370,000 Pennsylvania jobs, which is so important. And they said that they would completely shut it down. And then trade deals. I mean, trade with Mexico and Canada in Pennsylvania alone supports close to 500,000 jobs. So it's so important that we maintain the agenda. We saw numbers come out today, which once again knocked the socks off and shocked. And there's some states, and you're pretty close around here too, some states that take a different approach and are very closed, and so that obviously impedes the ability. But there was the fastest growth in GDP, 33.1% growth in GDP. Think about that. It's never happened before, and we need that to continue.
One of the things that I know I love about the president, and one of the things I think that most people appreciate, is that he's not a typical politician. In fact, I don't think there's any. He ran in 2016 as the disruptor, as the change agent, and he is still, despite the fact that he is an incumbent, he is still the disruptor. He is still someone that is bucking the system. I think one of the reasons he has been so successful and been able to get so much done is because he doesn't operate the way that everybody else that comes to Washington does. Talk to us a little bit about what you've seen and how you've seen him truly shake up Washington and why that's been so successful the last 4 years.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And there are countless examples of him changing Washington and bending Washington as opposed to the opposite. And the reality is most politicians, they show up in DC, and even if well-intended, they lose their compass. They quickly forget who sent them there and why they came. And it requires tremendous conviction to maintain the course and disrupt the status quo. Incredibly difficult. So you take something like trade, for example, and USMCA, which replaced the job-killing NAFTA, unbelievable trade deal. And workers, we moved the whole party on this issue. So the president, when he arrived in Washington, Republicans were not aligned behind him on trade. And he changed all of their perspectives and got the Democrats on board and signed into law the largest trade deal in history. So it was just extraordinary, and that's just one example. But another one I think about often is the moving of the American embassy in Jerusalem. One of those things that was the right thing to do, and so many past presidents had pledged to do so, and yet once they were in office, they failed to follow through on their promise, like is so true of so many politicians. And this president had the same generals who said that the sun wouldn't rise the next morning and wouldn't set the next night, and the same foreign leaders who called him and begged him not to disrupt the status quo, and the same politicians on both sides of the aisle who said, just wait a little longer, and he did it because it was the right thing to do. And as a result, that was one step towards the direction where we're now seeing several years of hard work and strategy blossom into peace in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And we want to talk about traditional politicians, the condescending way that they talked about and viewed the president and my husband's approach to engaging with the Middle East was uniform in their rejection of the prospects that they would be able to foster and advance peace. And now you have 3 peace deals signed between Israel and an Arab country in less than 3 months.
One thing that is, to me, particularly as we've been on the campaign trail over the last couple of days, but certainly even just watching since the beginning of his first campaign, is the amount of energy and enthusiasm, one that the president has, but also the people that come out to support the president. There is such a contrast between, look at this room. People are excited, they're happy to be here.
We love you!
As far too many families across the world have experienced when my father went to the hospital with COVID a couple of weeks ago, and now he's bouncing around the country with more energy in his pinky than most of us have. It's extraordinary. I was telling Sarah backstage about a quote I recently read from Winston Churchill. And he said, "It's the country that has the lion's heart. I gave it the roar." And that makes me think of this movement and this
And I think that just says so much about who the president is, who your father is he brings that energy, he brings that optimism, which is so opposite of what we're seeing from the other side, which is all doom and gloom. And I think that has given him the ability to really change the narrative. And certainly I am happy to see all of that excitement as we've gone around. And one of the things that I find so remarkable is it's not just the president, it's everyone around him. You, your brothers are out, you're campaigning. No one has been attacked like this president. No one has had to withstand the amount of negative attention to critics, despite the fact that the country is doing well, that we are thriving as a country. Tell us a little bit about how you each overcome and how you deal with all of the critics, because despite the fact that you are constantly berated, you each get up every single day and keep fighting for this country. This is it. Because we know what we're fighting for, we know who we're fighting for, and each one of you drives the president every single day. And that's why you see him connect on the road. You see the genuine joy he has when he leaves Washington. And he's reminded what he does it for. Most politicians, they don't have that because he loves you. And you have to be in this business because it's so nasty. And it really is. I mean, the president always says that it's not exactly like he was dealing with little babies in the New York real estate business. But this business blows that out of the water in terms of vitriol and just negative energy. But the love also counterbalances to such an extreme that it really is, that's incredibly rewarding. And he always says, and I always think about the fact, you have to be in it for the impact. You know, it's not going to be the accolades, especially if you're a disruptor, right? Because you make a lot of people angry. And you have to be okay with that. Recently, I was watching ads paid for by Big Pharma on television. I mentioned this actually in my convention speech. And the ad was so mean and so nasty. Call the president, tell him he's doing horrible things. And he turns and looks at me and goes, you know, we've got to be doing something really right if they're hitting us this hard. Correlated to making them feel a little bit uncomfortable and disrupting the establishment and the status quo for the benefit of the American people. One thing that I think a lot of people miss about the president is how much he empowers working families, particularly moms. I was the very first mom to ever serve as the White House press secretary. Young kids, you have made it a personal crusade in many ways. You've run a very successful business, but also of making sure that all working families have opportunities. You've been at the forefront of that in your father's administration, and I think you've got a great success story of what you and he have been able to accomplish to help. Let's talk about that for a few minutes and some of the big moments to help working families.
Absolutely. Well, I think this president, as a person who was just recently at the helm of a major company, he understands the composition of the modern workforces and the challenges of that workforce. So he's taken on issues that were not conventionally seen as Republican issues, and he's led on them, whether it's child care support for working parents, understanding the fact that access to safe and affordable child care is an undeniable work-related expense. I think COVID is proving that to anyone who may have otherwise doubted it. So it was this president who, prior to COVID, had overseen the largest expansion of block grants to the states for exactly this purpose, for working parents who couldn't afford the cost. Paid family leave. 8 million more Americans today have paid family leave than when the president took office. Nothing in the form of the temporary relief package. All of this had happened prior. Obviously, it increased through that. But it has been amazing to see him take on issues that traditionally had been avoided or ignored and really lead on them and bring them into the forefront of the Republican Party in such a meaningful way. One example as well, another, is doubling the child tax credit as part of tax reform. Over 40 million American families will benefit in 2019 alone an average of $2,200 a family. Extraordinary. So these are things that are not often talked about, but are incredibly important. And it takes somebody who was an employer, who's connected to the American worker to understand these things and prioritize these things and advance them as real issues. Look, I always think of women's issues, our family issues, our American issues. We represent 50% of the population. So I don't like typically talking about them as women's issues. We care about everything. But obviously certain things like what I'm talking about disproportionately will benefit women as we provide the vast majority of unpaid care for our children, and often and increasingly for adult dependents as well. So it's really important to recognize that reality and support the American working family as he's done so strongly. Put the funding behind it as well, helping law enforcement with prosecutions through Department of Justice, really breaking up these trafficking rings. We're seeing it across the country. Our U.S. Marshals doing just a phenomenal job finding these traffickers and rescuing the victims. And then rehabilitation services, which is enormously important as we help these victims turn the page and hopefully be able to resume a wonderful life. But it is the gravest of evils, and the president will not rest until it's stamped out.
On the final days leading up to the election, I don't think it's a secret that Pennsylvania is going to be a big part of Donald Trump's success story.
Yeah.
That we can count on the people in this room to come out and really support this president. I think one of the most important things we can do in these final days is help grow beyond this room. So I'd love for you to talk to everybody about ways that they can help make sure we get Donald Trump reelected for 4 more years. Because even though some of you may have already voted, you may have friends that haven't, we need to make sure you get them out. So Ivanka, let's tell them how they can help and how they can engage and make sure we get President Trump reelected.
Well, if everyone in this room could find 5 people to bring in to assist in the process of getting to a polling location, 88022. If you text VOTE to that, you can find out all the information about where you can vote and gain real-time updates of what's going on. Obviously, the website, but it boils down to turnout. We need you, and the president every single day is fighting so hard for each one of us, and now we have a chance to fight for him and fight for the future of this country we love so much, and we have to do it. We just have to do it.
I'd like to say that you need to call every friend you have and make sure you get them out to vote. But now I've changed that to actually say, we don't care if they're your friends or not. Call everybody you know, because the future of our country depends on it. We need you to.
Well, Sarah knows the president's taking to
Saying, you know what, if you have a friend who's registered in Pennsylvania and you had a fight with them, make up, call them and tell them to vote. If they move to Florida, you haven't spoken to each other in 3 decades, it's okay, call them, have a very short conversation and then remind them to vote. But that's what it's going to take.
Absolutely. And I know we don't want to take too much more time, but one thing I just want to close with and want to ask you to do is talk about what this election means and what the future of our country looks like under this president and why this campaign and why this election is so important.
Well, the contrast between 2 candidates could not be more clear. Joe Biden has been in government for 47 years, the ultimate in establishment, but he's also been pulled so far left that the policies he's endorsing, from Green New Deal to defunding our men and women in blue, wouldn't even be thinkable 5-6 years ago. So it's really, the party has gone in a direction that I think is foreign to so many people who would have otherwise considered themselves to be Democrats. I talk to Democrats all the time, and you should see the people coming out to the president's rallies, to our rallies. A good chunk of them are former Democrats. I bet you in this room. it's unrecognizable what the party has become. So if you believe in safe communities, if you believe in prosperity, if you believe in American greatness and exceptionalism, and if you want to realize the greatest American comeback, the only person you can vote for is President Donald Trump.
The room a favor, and I hope this doesn't get me in trouble. Ivanka's giving me a look like it's going to get me in trouble. So there's actually,
Gets that Dennis the Menace look in her eye when she's about to say something.
November 3rd is obviously a very big day in this country, but tomorrow something else very big is happening. It's Ivanka Trump's birthday. And instead of skipping her birthday celebrating, she will be spending it campaigning for our great president. So, in order to make her birthday just a tiny bit special, and since I will not have the opportunity to be with her tomorrow, I think we should give this room to sing happy birthday to her. So, I can't sing. So
No, Sarah, we're not letting her off the hook. Let's make her sing it for her.
asking anybody to join in the Trump dance. We're going to leave that to the president. I think he has mastered that. And it's gone viral. If you haven't seen it, make sure you take time to check it out. But I'll count to 3, and I'm going to let this front row, you're going to carry it. Our soon-to-be Congresswoman is going to be 1, 2, 3.